In this video, I'm going to discuss the different functions of different kinds of characters in a script. This is kind of from the writer's perspective. We won't be talking about character types or archetypes, but more how the character functions in the storyline and what kinds of characters are necessary to make a story fleshed out. Join me after the bump. Thank you for joining me today. It's good to see you here. So we're talking about types of characters, the roles that characters play in a plot. And each plot has to have certain kinds of characters. Well, not all of them need to be in every story, but most fleshed out stories have a number of these different characters. Let's get started. The protagonist is the most important character of any story. It is the main story, it's the lead of the story. The audience follows the protagonist's story from the beginning of the story to the end of it. They are almost always there. They're not in every scene, perhaps, but it is their story that is being told. They are also a character that the audience identifies, they root for. Now, a protagonist does not have to be a good person. They can be kind of a criminal or an evil person in nature, but we follow them and we root for them. So let me give you an example. Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz is the protagonist. We care about her, we see her from start to finish, and it's her story that's being told. And the Wicked Witch is the villain in that story. Whereas in Wicked, Elphaba, the Wicked Witch, is the protagonist. And even though she's considered evil and we see her journey and descent into evilness, she is the protagonist. And we root for her and we follow her from beginning to end. So that's what a protagonist is. Now, a protagonist doesn't have to be a human being. It can be an animal. It can be a cartoon character. Or it can be a toaster. It's basically a character that is the most fleshed out and developed in the script. The main thing that the protagonist is fighting against is the antagonist. An antagonist is kind of the opposite of the protagonist, the hero of the story. They are maybe a villain or just somebody that is directly opposed or creates obstacles or is the biggest concern of the protagonist. Now, an antagonist does not have to be another person. An antagonist can be a group or an animal. There's man versus man, there's man versus nature, there's man versus God, there's man versus himself. So an antagonist could be the inner workings of a person, their own psychotic nature. The next main character is a deuteragonist, or often referred to as a sidekick. This is a companion to the protagonist. Also, the antagonist can have their own deuteragonist. And this character is kind of their confidant, the person that supports them, that helps them through things, that humors them, that gives them wisdom and advice. And they are usually a pretty main character. So Robin would be Batman's deuteragonist. The foil is a character that expresses a personality that is quite the opposite of the protagonist or the hero of the story. And they're not the antagonist. They're not against, per se, the main character in any meaningful way, or they're not the main villain of the piece, but they serve to illustrate the character traits of the protagonist by showing the opposite, by showing the climate that the protagonist finds themselves in. In The Wizard of Oz, the wizard might be the foil character to Dorothy. He's not the main antagonist, but he provides some sort of conflict in the thing, and by contrast, his big bravado and scariness is the opposite of Dorothy's innocent meekness and goodness. By contrast, it illustrates how good a character Dorothy is. In Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy is the foil to Harry Potter. He is kind of a brat, and he's kind of against Harry Potter throughout the plot, and that causes friction and conflict. But it also just shows how good of a wizard Harry Potter is by how bad of a wizard Draco Malfoy is. I mean, how evil and good. You know what I'm saying. A mentor or a confidant is somebody that nurtures the protagonist or gives them advice, counsels them. So for instance, characters like Yoda or Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars would be the confidant or the mentor to Luke Skywalker, who would be the protagonist. The love interest. Even if it's not a love story, the protagonist and sometimes the antagonist and sometimes the other characters will have a love interest, somebody that they are desire, that they're doing something for, and this person dotes on them or ignores them or whatever the case may be. Having a love interest adds spark and excitement to your characters. Secondary characters. These characters they can be deuteragonists or sidekicks, but the deuteragonist is usually a little bit more featured in the story plot. Secondary characters kind of come and go. They sometimes are with the protagonist and sometimes with the villain and the antagonist, and sometimes their own free agents. But they're pretty major characters, and they have maybe their own plot lines as well. So characters like Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger are secondary characters in the Harry Potter story. The tertiary characters. So this is a little bit more of a minor character in the plot. They pop in, they usually have some sort of function, they help the protagonist out in some way or hurt them in some way. Tertiary characters are often static in nature, they don't change a lot. So for instance, Professor McGonagall in the Harry Potter story would be a tertiary character. She pops in from time to time, she's the teacher, and she doesn't really change much in the story. A narrator. A narrator is whoever is telling the story. Now, often that could be the protagonist. It can sometimes be the antagonist. It could be a secondary character or a tertiary character. And sometimes things are narrated and sometimes they're not. So if the story isn't narrated or spoken or told, then you wouldn't have a narrator necessarily. Stock characters. Stock characters can be anything. The teacher, the coach, the parent, the child. They're just sort of generic characters that don't change. They also don't serve a useful function in the plot. They're just there to illustrate the life that a character lives in. So for instance, a bartender that serves a character a drink, they're just a typical bartender. Says, "Oh, you having a bad day? Oh, I'm so sorry. Here's a drink." That's a stock character. A static character is a character that stays the same throughout. So they are not developed, they don't change their attitudes. Now they can still have personality and they can still have a little bit of a function in the plot, but they don't change. Whereas a dynamic character is somebody whose path changes. So for instance, a sidekick of a hero might change over the course of time as they learn new information. They move to the other side, to the dark side, and become a villain. Or likewise, a villain's henchman could become a good guy and help the character out. Those are dynamic or changing characters. And all protagonists change and are dynamic in some way. They have to go through their hero's journey, and so they change and are dynamic. A flat character is just simply a character that is one-dimensional in nature. They could be interesting, but they don't have any depth or complexity to them whatsoever. They may pop in to be the brunt of a joke or deliver a punchline, and then they're out of there. With a flat character, you always know what you're going to get. And conversely, a round character is one that is complex and has a lot of conflict within them. You might not ever know which direction they lean, whether they're for the protagonist or against them. Their opinions might shift throughout. These kind of characters are important for a story because they add dimension to the story. They add mystery to a story. Audrey Horne in the Twin Peaks series is a mysterious character. Sometimes you think she's a little evil, and sometimes you think she's a little good, and sometimes she plays for the good guys and sometimes for the bad guys. You can't ever quite figure out what her motivations are, or they change quite a bit. That's a round character. So that's about it for those basic functions. So every character is going to fit into one of these things. If you're in the ensemble of a theater show, you're going to be playing a stock possibly flat character. If you've got a one-liner in a show, you're going to be a flat or a stock or a tertiary character. Likewise, if you're playing a supporting character, you got to know how you support. Are you supporting the protagonist or the antagonist? Are you removed from that battle? Do you have your own storyline? You know, it's possible for some scripts to have more than one protagonist, especially television series and things like that. There are more than one protagonist along the way, or there's a duo of protagonists that are each following their own storyline. That adds more complexity to the script as well. But knowing where you fit in the script and knowing what your character is will help you play it a little bit better. If your character is a one-dimensional character or a stock character, you don't need to worry too much about developing their backstory or figuring out how they're going to change or what they learn. You just play them for what they are. Likewise, if you're playing a protagonist or an antagonist, you will then develop your whole backstory and your story arc and create a more fleshed out character. So I hope you found this useful, and if you want to learn more about character types, including how to find your character type or about archetypes and other character related things, I have a playlist on your screen right now. You might want to check that out. As always, I hope you subscribe, and if you don't, then I will never see you again, so it doesn't matter. Have a good day, and I do hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.